So we'll be asking those questions tonight, and hopefully, we'll have an answer for them. I thought I'd start in your Bible. Go to 89 verse 7. We'll be reading Psalm 89 verse 7. But before we read that passage, one man says that reverence in modern day religion isn't what it used to be. Has that surprised you? Let me repeat it. Reverence in modern religion, meaning today, modern day religion, isn't what it used to be. But what does that mean? Meaning that casual is way to go. Okay. One denominational preacher called Rick Warren, you might know him from the book Purpose-Driven Life, right? If you are men and go to men's breakfast. Okay. In fact, when he was writing that same book, he did a survey in the community, and the survey was, what do you want in the church? Okay, what do you want in the church? Obviously, the service, in a range, but one of the things that he determined, do not want to dress up for worship. That was one of the things that he determined in the survey. So then he kind of built, his congregation, if you will, around that survey, right? But, unfortunately, some of the Lord's church today still study this book. But in saying that, I think he was right. That, some people today do not like to dress up. They actually found dressing down more appealing to them. It's more comfortable to them. There is an article, a blog, more like, but it's quite different because if it's just a normal blog, you just read it. But this blog, you can actually, reply to the blog. It's titled, can I wear jeans? Obviously, in a context of, in worship, kind of in that area. And one of the reply, one guy says that I will be preaching in them tomorrow. I want you to, I know I kind of sounded like, okay, where you're going with this, but I want you to have an open mind on this, okay? Because we're going to look at, what the Bible says about this. So what is the purpose of this? You might be asking, Paulo, what's the purpose of this? Tonight, I want to address the value on casual, as we understand it today, and personal comfort or our own convenience, to neglect what really God wants, what really God desires of us when we come to worship Him every first day of the week. So let's start with Psalm 89, verse 7. Psalm 89:7 says, God is greatly to be feared in the assembly of the saints, and to be held in reverence by all those around him. Okay. The first part, it says that God is greatly to be feared. See, that word feared comes from the Hebrew word yarats. Y-A-R-A-T-S. Yarats. And first set of meanings of that word feared is to tremble, is to dread, is to fear, is to oppress, is to prevail, break, be terrified, cause to tremble. And then another set of meaning of that fear, of that word fear in Hebrew, is to regard or treat with awe. Okay? So God is to be feared. We are to what? We are to tremble and to regard him with awe. And then the second part of that verse that says, and to be held in reverence. To be held in reverence by all those surround him, or around him, sorry. Now, that word held in reverence in Hebrew is Yahweh, Y-A-R-A-Y. And the first set of meanings of that word is to, again, to fear, to revere, to be afraid. And another set of meaning is to reverence, show reverence, honor, and respect. In the assembly of the saints, we should have, according to this passage, we should have tremble and awe as we come into the presence of God. In that kind of context, it makes me think of Moses as he approached the burning bush. So what happens? God called him Moses. Moses replied, and then as Moses approached the burning bush, what happened? God stopped him. Why though? Let's go to Exodus 3. Exodus 3, we'll be reading verse 5. It says here, then he said, this is God speaking here to Moses. Then he said, do not draw near this place. Why? Well, I want you to take your sandals off first. Right? So take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy. Right? So what does that tell us? That when you come into the presence of God, you're going to have to behave differently. You're going to have to conduct yourself differently. You're going to have to dress differently. We'll go into a little bit more details on that. Also in Exodus 19, as the Israelites coming out from Egypt, okay, let's go to Exodus 19 and then reading verse 9 through 11. So now the Israelites just come out from Egypt. And verse 9 says, and the Lord said to Moses, behold, I come to you in the thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you, and believe you forever. So Moses told the words of the people to the Lord. Now listen to verse 10. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes. 11. And let them be ready for the third day, for on the third day that the Lord will come down upon the Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. So before the Lord came down in the sight of the people, sight of the Israelites, the children of Israel, they were to be what? To be sanctified, to be pure, to be holy, and wash their clothes. What does that tell us? That means that something is very special is taking place. And what is that something special? They are coming into the presence of God. So meaning this wasn't just a casual thing, that God was going to come into their presence. Also in Revelation chapter 4, verses 10 and 11. When it's in that chapter, it's talking about the 24 elders. Revelation 4, 10 and 11. Verse 10, the 24 elders fall down before him, talking about God, who sits on the throne, and worship him, who lives forever and ever, and cast their crowns before the throne, saying, you are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory, honor, and power. You see, when we read the Bible about people coming into the presence of God, when we read about them in the Bible, we talk about Moses. You probably have someone in your minds that they are coming into the presence of God, and the respect and the honor that they are showing to God, how they are treating God as they walk into the presence of him. I think sometimes if we are looking at them, people, if we're reading at them in the Bible. And I think sometimes we are falling down on the job in that, on how we treat God as we come to him. Do we come to him with respect? Do we come to him with honor? And many a times we have not, treated God as, someone special. Adam was talking about it today, about, if there's something, someone invented something today, it's like, oh, you know what? It's just going to be another something. But see, this God that we are worshiping, it's one to be feared. It's one who brings awe. That's how it should be. But sometimes we've kind of treated him as ordinary, as casual. Again, Psalms 89:7, what does it say? We are to be feared. We are to hold him in reverence. So tonight, that's kind of like the foundation of where we're going tonight. We're going to be talking about reverence, but in particular, how it relates to our clothing. Okay? How we dress, how we should dress when we come to the presence of God in our worship. I'll be bringing 3 points tonight, which is our clothing. First of all, communicate something to God. And it does communicate something to God. We'll look into that. And secondly, our clothing communicates something to others. And then lastly, our clothing communicate something to us, to ourselves. So first, our clothing communicates something to God. See, we've mentioned Moses and we've mentioned the Israelites. See, if it didn't, then why did Moses have to take off his sandals as he approached, as God says, this is a holy place? And if it didn't, why did God make the Israelites wash their clothes before him coming into their sights? Imagine, just for a second, what if one of the Israelites says, you know what, Moses, I'm not going to do it, because God gave them 3 days. Because, when Moses said the command, after 3 days, and after that, God will come. So they have 3 days. What if one of the Israelites, just imagine that one of the Israelites says to Moses, you know what, Moses, I'm not going to do it. You know what? I'm not washing my clothes. See, my clothes right now, I'm more comfortable with them after wearing them for a few days. And it's just, washing them is just hassle. I have to go to the river, get some water, and then wash my clothes, and I have to wait hours to get them dry. See, if one of the Israelites had done that, what do you think that communicates to God? What do you think that attitude communicates to God? What do you think that person communicates to God? I would suggest that it communicated to God that he is not worthy. If someone have done that. And we have to be careful. We have to be careful that we don't communicate that today. In Exodus 39 and Leviticus 16, we have a description of a priest's garment. If you read it, right, the amount of effort that put in preparing the priest's garment come into the presence of God, it's just tremendous. Tremendous. And I think that begs the question, why did God give such in-depth details if clothing doesn't really matter to him? In 1 Chronicles 15, this is about the Ark of the Covenant, that it was taken by the Philistines, and the Israelites are going to take it back home. And if you if you remember the story, if you remember the account, the ark gets left in the house of Obed-Edom for 3 months. Then finally, David tries to take the Ark of the Covenant back. Let's turn to 1 Chronicles 15, and we'll be reading verses 25 through 27. So here comes David trying to get the Ark of the Covenant back from the Philistines. Verse 25 says, "So David, the elders of Israel, and the captains over thousands went to bring up the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord from the house of Obed-Edom with joy. And so it was, when God helped the Levites who bore the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, that they offered 7 bulls and 7 rams." Verse 27, "And David was clothed with a robe of fine linen, as were all the Levites who bore the ark, the singers, and I don't know how to pronounce that word, Kenaniah, the music master, with the singers. David also wore the linen ephod." So why is that mentioned in verse 27, the first part, that David was clothed in with a robe of fine linen? Why is that? What is the importance of that? Why is that there? And apparently, back in those days, what David was wearing was a special clothing. You can't just get that anywhere. It was a special clothing, something out of the ordinary. David clothed himself in a special way because of what they were doing. What are they doing? They were about to take the Ark of the Covenant back home. And then we know, the Ark of the Covenant is often spoken in the Bible as God dwelling, between the cherubims. So they were going into the presence of God. So David clothed in a special way because he was about to do a very special thing. And that was, again, coming into the presence of God. Now, is there a passage in the Bible, in the scriptures, that you have to dress in a special way when, let's say, David, when retrieving the Ark of the Covenant? Is there a passage in the Bible that says that demanded that's a requirement? No, none. But there is, though, a passage of the high priest when, going to worship, that they have to dress in a special way. But I can only suggest that David, there was no passage for David to dress that way. But I can only suggest that David dressed that way, that special way, because of the principle of, again, that word reverence. He was going to get the Ark of the Covenant. He was going to go to the presence of God. And he would not dare do it without, wearing that communicate proper respect to God. He would just want to be reverent and as respectful as he possibly can. And I think that's a good indication that our clothing does communicate something to God. Someone might say, well, all the passages that you've presented so far are from the Old Testament. We are now living in the New Testament. That's a valid point. Let me take you to 1 Corinthians 11 now. 1 Corinthians 11, where Paul wrote a letter to the Corinthians concerning some issues. And in 1 Corinthians 11, we found there that the men were taught what? To worship with head uncovered, meaning not wearing a veil. And the women were taught to worship to wear a veil. And if they don't, they would be what? Breaking the local customs in the society, in Corinth, in that place. Let's look at why in a minute. But for now, at this moment, let's simply acknowledge that God cared about how we dress in worship, that how we clothe ourselves. And it communicated something to him that mattered to him. See, people today, in the world would argue and say that what mattered to God is the heart. And it does. He doesn't care how we clothe ourselves in worship. But again, I want you to imagine this. Imagine this. What if someone in the church in Corinth, went to Paul and says, you know what, Paul? See this whole veil business? We're not doing it. No, this whole veil stuff. We don't want to hear it. God doesn't care about what we wear or what we don't wear. What do you think Paul would have said to that person? And see, what's interesting is that there is no passage in the whole scripture or in the Bible or any previous written letter that demanded that women have to wear a veil in worship. There's no passage. What made the veil thing important? What made the veil thing mandatory is that it was their local custom. Okay? So, in other words, for a woman not to wear a veil, that would communicate as, rebellious, lack of respect, or lack of reverence. So what does that tell us then? What does that tell us? It tells us that God expects us to follow local customs and behave and conduct ourselves in a manner that glorifies Him. And does that apply on how we dress? Yeah, I would say so. Pardon me, in our society today, in Cumbernauld today, whether you wear a veil or not, it doesn't communicate anything to God. But then if we apply the current local customs, then it would. Right? So, again, if you're in Corinth and you're a woman and you do not wear a veil, it communicates lack of respect. It communicates lack of reverence. So our clothing does communicate something to God. So if our clothing communicates something to God, then our clothing communicates something to other people. And the book of Esther, when the king had a decree that the Jews are about to be killed, Mordecai changed his clothes. If you read that in Esther 4:1. Why do you think that is? Well, because Mordecai was grieving when he found out that the Jews are about to be killed. And when Esther heard about it, she sends him a change of clothing. You see, in that situation, Mordecai's clothing communicated something to other people. Again, let's consider 1 Corinthians 11 in that woman and men veil thing. God knew what we wear or what we don't wear communicated something to others. So back in Corinth, if a man in Corinth would wear a veil, it communicated something inappropriate to other people. And on the other hand, if a woman would not wear a veil, it communicated something negative. Again, as I mentioned already, a lack of respect and rebellion. And with that in mind, Paul wrote to them and said, dress so as to communicate the proper message. So for the woman, it would be wear a veil in that society. Again, what's interesting is that there is no passage in the Bible specifically said that women in Corinth had to wear a veil, or is a universal requirement for the whole church that said women had to wear a veil. In fact, in 1 Corinthians 11, in verse 16, it says, but if anyone seems to be contentious, we have no such custom, nor the churches of God. So why? Why then we were required to dress that way? They were required to dress that way. It is because of what it communicated in that society, in their local custom. The way we dress communicated something to other people. And God expects us to be conscious of that, to be aware of that. So then, what about in our society today? What about in Scotland, Cumbernauld? Does the way we dress communicated something, anything in our society? We know that it does. We know that. When we go to a wedding, when we go to a funeral, what do? We want to communicate respect. So we would wear a suit, nice shirt, and maybe a necktie. When we go meet someone special, when you go meet the Queen, if you, go see the Queen and show up with, I don't know, a pair of Toms, no socks, and a jumper, what do you think that communicated? I think that would communicate something, insulting. And it's important that we recognize this, because we just look in 1 Corinthians 11 about their local custom, that God expects us to be aware of the society around us and customs around us, and to, again, behave appropriately. For example, when we went to Malawi the first time, Graham gave us a briefing of what we should do, what we should do, and what we shouldn't do. And Graham told the girls, Nicole and Siobhan, that you should wear a gown, a long dress, because that's their custom. And we have to conduct ourselves, we have to behave ourselves, and follow the custom. It's their local, it's in that society. And if there is a place somewhere in the world where their custom is, if you wear a black, let's say black shirt, that it would mean something, lack of respect, then if I go to that place, I wouldn't wear a black shirt in worship. And obviously that's not our custom today. So what is our custom today in our society? Now, again, we're talking about reverently, okay? We're talking about reverently, and we already looked at that God expects us to communicate right things by the way we dress. How would we dress in our society to communicate reverence? Well, I think to answer that question is we need to know the society. An author While writing his book, he conducted an experiment. And this experiment was, he was in a train station and he was asking people for money. You know, he would be saying to the people, look, I'm really embarrassed to ask you this, but you know, I left my wallet at home, and you know, I need, let's say, 70p to get back home. Can you help me? He did this for 2 hours. In the first hour, he wear a suit, but with no necktie. In the second hour, he wear the same suit, but this time he wore a necktie. In the first hour, he made 7 quid. And in the second hour, with the necktie on, he made 26 quid. And the guy even gave him extra money to buy a paper. So why did he make nearly 4 times as much on the second hour when he put his necktie on? This is what he says. He says, the tie is a symbol of respectability and responsibility. It communicates to other people who you are, or reinforces or detracts from their conception of who you should be. Now, same author, after conducting loads of studies and loads of experiments, this is his conclusion. He says, what a person wears is directly related to the success that he will have in life. Now, it's obviously that this guy is writing in a business perspective, but it does support our point that we're making, that clothing do say something to other people. One man says, they, talking about clothes, they openly reveal your attitude towards yourself, self-esteem, toward others, relationships, toward your work, its importance, and toward your God, reverence or lack of reverence toward him. Modest clothing is that giveaway of a person with loose morals, and indicates the importance of that which you are doing. And what's interesting is that we have, you know, I've mentioned a couple guys in the world, in the secular world, and they are saying that casual dress communicates something to other people, or communicate something to them that's, you know, something that's a lack of respect. You know, when we go to places, we look around, you know, the way people dress immediately communicate something to us. You know, it says something about their attitude. It says something about, you know, if their excitement. You can just say, you can just tell. On an article in the internet, and it's titled, it's a question. It says, casual Friday on the way out. And, you know, it's talking about casual Fridays at work and, you know, in other places. And this is what it says. It says, casual dress led to careless dress and carefree attitudes. Such negligence is not a good business practice and did not go to unnoticed or without consequences. As a result, a growing number of companies are revamping their dress codes entirely. The pendulum is swinging back to more formal and traditional workplace attire. Dress down day is being replaced with dress up day, and formal Friday is replacing casual Friday. Again, I think it's interesting that people in the world they recognize that casual dress leads to casual attitudes. Now, what's the whole point of all this? The whole point is that the way we dress it has an effect on us. It affects us. So if the way I dress matters to God, if the way I dress communicated something to others, and if the way I dress affects me in my mindset, then certainly, when we come to worship, we should want to dress in a way that reflects our heart of reverence. It's true that God looks at the hearts. And it's also true that what's in our hearts reflects what's in the outside. So let me say that again. That we should come to worship and we should want to dress in a way that reflects our heart of reverence. God bless.
Well, before the Lord's Supper, let's stand to 494. 494.